So, GameMaker is kind of similar to Bitsy in the sense that we basically have like our game window, we have different rooms, and we can create scenery and player and different things we can interactive. But it's more like a fully featured game engine in the sense that it's a little opinionated in terms of how it expects us to set up the game, but it's very open-ended in terms of what we do with the game, as opposed to Bitsy, which really only has a few basic features. So GameMaker is designed for you to be able to make anything that you want, which is great because we can make lots of different things, but obviously the disadvantage of that is that you kind of have to figure out how you want to make things. So it's very open-ended. So we'll go over some of the basics. So obviously, if we want to get started with a new project, we're going to go to New. And it has some default projects here. So we're going to do a blank project and just start from scratch. But if you look down here, it's sort of hard to see on my screen. Again, my screen is kind of small. But there's some default projects that will actually give you some artwork, some graphics to get started with. And these sort of align with their tutorials. So if you're wanting to kind of like, work on some stuff on your own to reinforce what we're doing in class, these are good places to start. If there's something specific you want to start with, you can grab one of these. But we're going to start with a blank game. You can see there's also a blank pixel game. This just changes the renderer so that it's better for pixel graphics. It really doesn't, either one of these is fine. I'm going to do a pixel game because the built-in editor is sort of like pixel art oriented. But if you want to use something else, that's totally fine. It's really just changing one setting. So it doesn't really matter that much which one of these you start with. When we create a new pixel game, for some reason the options are a little bit different, but that's okay. So when we start a new pixel game, it's going to ask you which language you want to use. We're going to use the visual scripting language. That's a good way to kind of get started with programming by using like visual blocks. We'll go over that a little bit in the second part of class. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to show you guys how to do some of the scripting, but you don't have to do it on your own. You can if you're interested in learning it, but I'm going to share my scripts with you guys so you can use the scripts that I create to make the game run in your game. Anyway, I'm going to choose GML Visual. That's just GameMaker language, but the visual version. You can also convert visual scripts to code later if you want to. So then I'm going to choose a name for this project. So I'm going to call this GameMaker Fall 2025. I'll call this GameMaker Demo. And you can name it whatever you want. You can always, change the name later if you want to. And then you can, it's going to have this default location in your user/GameMaker projects. That's perfectly fine if you want to save it there. You'll be able to find it when you open GameMaker anyway. But if you want to save it like on your desktop or something like that, you can always, open this project folder and save it somewhere else. But I kind of like having the GameMaker projects together, so I'm just going to leave the default location. But it's good to know where it is, so we can see that there. Okay, so then just click Let's Go, and it's going to set up the engine. And I can't download this template. Yeah, I'm having a lot of issues with access to stuff. So let's just go with the blank game template. Never mind. I'm going to try to figure out those issues soon, but so far I've been not able to. Anyway, let's call this GameMaker Demo Fall 2025, and we'll save it in the same place. So we're just doing the regular blank game. The blank pixel game template is not downloaded. I guess these other templates are probably not downloaded either, but we'll figure that out later. Okay, so now we're in the workspace. And so you can see by default, it makes a bunch of folders for you for different types of assets. These are all the different types of assets that you might use in a game. We're not going to use most of these, so you don't have to do this, but I like to keep things simple and organized, so I'm going to delete a lot of these things. I'm going to hide this quick access thing. I don't really use this that much, but you can leave it open if you want. But I'm going to hide this by clicking on the little triangle. And then the only types of things that we're going to use in this project are objects, which every game has. It's sort of the most basic property. rooms, which every GameMaker has, every GameMaker game has, and it gives you a room by default. So we're going to use the rooms, and then we're going to use sprites, which is our art or animations. Everything else I'm just going to delete because they're just folders. I can always bring them back later if I want to add other stuff. So I'm just going to select each one of these folders and then click delete. You can also select multiple folders if you want to speed this process up a little bit. And it's also asking me to confirm if I want to delete stuff. This is a good thing to have on just so you don't accidentally delete things, but you can click don't show this again. So let's delete everything except objects, rooms, and sprites. And this is, kind of similar to what we had in Bitsy. We had our rooms, and we had our the paint area, which had the avatar, tiles, items, and NPCs. We're going to build all those things from scratch. So we have more generic things. We have objects, which are things in the game. We have rooms, which are the levels of the game. And then we have sprites, which is our art and animations. So that's how I'm going to set up my assets folder. And we're going to create some assets in here in a moment. This middle window is our workspace. This is kind of where we do our drawing, we write our code, we design the level, everything that kind of happens in here. Down here is our debug section. We're not going to use this a ton, but if we get errors, they're going to pop up here, and we may look at how to deal with those in the future. But for now, we're not really going to worry about this. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit, and I can always pop this back up with this thing. Over here is the inspector. Right now it's empty because I don't have anything selected, but when I have something selected, it's going to show me properties about that item that I can change. And so we'll go over how that works in a moment. All right, so let's start with our room. Let's just set up our room really basic. So if I double click on this room, room 1, you can call this something else if you want to. You can right click and go to rename, and you could name this level 1 or whatever, but I'm just going to stick with room 1. That's fine. When I double click on room 1, notice that it opens up a new window in the editor where I can edit the room. I can also just leave that and it goes back to the workspace. In the room editor, I have a bunch of tools. I can turn on this little grid thing, which I don't really see here. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see the grid. So that kind of shows you this grid that we can design on, sort of like our Bitsy grid, but it's a little bit bigger. We can zoom in and out using these tools. And then we can sort of set the zoom. This reset kind of zooms in to our just actual pixel size. So it shows you what it'll look like when you publish it. To navigate around here, you can use the scroll wheel on the mouse to scroll up and down. If you hold Shift and scroll, you'll go left and right. And if you hold Command and scroll, you'll zoom in and out. If you try to do those things and it doesn't really work, you may want to double check this laptop mode. If you're in laptop mode, it kind of changes all of the settings because it assumes that you don't have a scroll wheel and a mouse. But we do have a scroll wheel and a mouse, so we don't want laptop mode on. So if you see laptop mode on and it's acting weird, you can just toggle that off. So we have our room. We can do a couple things in the settings. So over here in the inspector, you can see some properties that our room has. It has 2 default layers, the background, which we'll edit in a moment. Or actually, I'm going to ignore the background for today. We'll edit it later. But then you have instances. These are things in your scene, like your player and items and stuff like that. And you can add layers here to kind of organize the content in the game. We're probably not going to do a ton of that. Under this layers section, you see some settings for the room. So there's the width and the height. I'm going to make my room a little bit smaller just because the screen that I'm working with is pretty small. Your screen is probably a little bigger, so you might leave it at the default size, but it's really up to you. So I'm going to set my screen to 600 pixels by 400 pixels. And that'll just make it a little bit easier for me to work with. And then, actually, I want to see what my grid... So my grid size is 32 by 32. So it's going to cut off a little bit. So let's see if I do 32 times, well, actually, if I do 32 times 10, that'll be 320. And if I multiply that by 2, that'll be 640. So if I do 640 by 320, then my grid will line up nicely with my room size. So that looks pretty good. You could actually do, let's see, what if we add 320 plus 64, 384 plus 32, 4. Okay, I'll just leave 320 by 640. That's a pretty simple room to start out with. It's going to be pretty small, but that's okay because we're just getting started. Okay, everything else I'm going to ignore. We'll go over a few room settings when we add some levels starting next week. But everything else I want to just leave the same. And then I want to start designing my character. Any questions so far, just going over kind of the basic interface and setting up the room? Okay, so I'm going to close the room. We'll use this a little bit more later, but for now I want to set up my character. And so the way I'm going to do this is sort of a specific workflow, which may not work for everybody. So you may have to kind of like do some version of this. You may have to like repeat this a couple times, but basically what I want to do is design a character and then make a few different animations. And each one of those animations is going to be a separate sprite. And so to save myself a little bit of time, what I'm going to do is make the character first and then duplicate the character to make each one of the animations. So that the character I have, when I bring it into the next animation, the settings will, sort of stay the same. There's two things that we want to keep in mind when we're designing the character for our platformer. One is that the character animations need to be lined up well for our character to move across the level without weird jittery stuff. So if you have a character and it switches from the idle animation to the walking animation, if it like moves or like does something weird, if it's in a different place, it's going to look really bad. And I'll show you what I mean as I make the animations, but that's one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the animations have to be like the same size and sort of the same rough orientation, or else it's going to look really glitchy. The other thing is that our character is going to be able to move left and right, and so we want to be able to mirror the character. So we can either make left and right animations for everything, or we can use the game engine to mirror the character. If we use the game engine to mirror the character, we need it to be able to flip. So I'll talk about that as I'm designing it, but it's just a couple things that we have to keep in mind. So I'm going to make my first character sprite. So I'm going to go to sprites and click create. You can also click this plus button to create any of these things. But if you want to put it in the right folder, what I usually do is right click on the folder and then go to create. There's also keyboard shortcuts for all of these. So for example, creating a sprite is just Option S. So I can create a sprite this way, but if I delete this sprite, I can also just click on sprites and hit Option S, and that'll make a new sprite. We're gonna have an object that matches our sprites. So when I name things, I usually put SPR for sprite at the beginning. Some people just put an S. I find putting SPR just a little bit more makes it easier to see things. You'll understand why this is important later when we start to build out our game. So I'm going to put SPR underscore and then player, and I'm going to put default here. So this player sprite isn't actually going to be part of the game. This is where I'm going to make my design, and then I'm going to make my animations based on the design. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's just a demo, but I'll give you guys a couple sort of things that I think about when I'm designing the character. So I'm going to double click on my sprite, and that brings my workspace open. Again, my screen is limited because I'm on the projector. It's low resolution. You'll see a lot more, you'll have a lot more space to work with it. Mine is a little condensed. But what I want to do is I have this image. The default size is 64 by 64. That's perfectly fine for what I'm doing, so I'm going to leave that as is. If you want like a really small condensed game, you might change that to 32 by 32. If you want bigger art and a larger game window, you could increase that to, whatever size. You can also import art. If you want to import art, you can do that here. But I'm going to go over that next week, so I wouldn't worry about that for now. So I'm going to go to Edit Image, and this opens the image editor. This is like a really kind of like bare bones little tiny version of Photoshop. You have like your brushes, you can draw. You have an eraser, so you can erase stuff. You can make extra frames. I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'll do that in a minute. You have different brush sizes. So if I do this, it's like a big brush. If I do this, it's like a circle. If I do that, it's, I can erase all that. I also have some shapes, like I can make a square, I can make a circle, I can make a triangle by putting, these points around. So there's a lot of different thingies I could do. I can make an arc. You can put text in here. There's a lot of different stuff that you can do. You can flip things around. You can select things. I'm not going to go over all of this. You guys can play around with this. And there's also plenty of, tutorials and stuff. But I'm just going to make a really simple character design. I want something that's going to be easy to animate because I don't want to, spend all of my time animating. But you guys may have, different ideas for what you want to do with your characters. If you're more art-oriented, you may want to spend a lot of time on your character. I'm going to turn on this grid because this is going to make it a lot easier for me to make a character that animates well within the game. So that's kind of one of the main things we need to think about when we're designing a character for the game is that our character in the game is always moving, and so our animations need to line up really well. So I'm going to turn the grid on, and I'm going to make sure the character is kind of like centered and, kind of stays relative to the grid. So I'm just going to draw like a little head for the character and a couple eyes. I'm going to kind of rip off the limbo setup where the eyes are, these two little dots, so it's easy to find the character. I'll give the character a little body, and then I'm going to give the character a couple of long legs. And let's see, maybe I can fill this in. And then I'll give the character a couple of long arms. Okay, so it doesn't look great, but we get the basic idea. And what we want to do is we want to use something simple. Actually, usually you could also just start with shapes. One thing that you could do, another way to do this actually that might be better, is to block out your character with a couple shapes. So if I want like a circle for the head, I can use a circle shape to get like a nice circle size. Maybe I'll use a square shape to get a good shape for the body, like that. And then I can make a new frame, and this is usually used for animation, but I can turn on the onion skin in this new frame, and then I can draw over this design. I'm also doing this with the mouse, so doesn't look that good, but you get the idea. Then I can kind of draw over this design, and I can delete that other shape when I'm ready. So let's give the character a couple eyes and two arms and two legs. Now I have like a very different looking character, but that's okay. Okay, so then I can just go back and delete this frame. And now I have my character design. All right. Hopefully you guys can make something that looks better than mine, but I just want to kind of demo that real quick. So now I have my default sprite. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make copies of this and design my animations using this as sort of a background. And that's going to help me make sure that my animations all, line up so they're going to look good. Another thing is I want my character to line up a little bit better with the size of this sprite. So I'm just going to move the art down here to the bottom like that. Okay, so that'll look a little bit better. I probably didn't need this to be so big. And I could probably increase the size of the character. I wonder if there's a way to size to scale this guy up. There might not be. Okay, anyway, this is good enough. So he's roughly symmetrical. It's going to be easy to kind of recreate the character. So I'm going to start with this as a default. The main point here is that I need my animations to match this original artwork. As long as they all kind of roughly match up, then it's going to look okay when I put it into the game engine later. Let's actually move them back like that. Okay, so we have my default sprite. I'm going to go and I'm just going to duplicate this. So I'm going to go to the asset browser and right click and hit duplicate. You can also hit Command D. And I'm going to start with my sprite player idle. So the idle animation is just a pretty basic animation that just like moves a little bit, just to give a sense that the player is exists and is alive. So when it's not walking anywhere, when it's not moving, we need just a really simple animation just so you know that the game is working. Sometimes you could have just like a one frame animation, and that would be fine. But it's nice to have a little bit of an idle animation just to give the character a little bit of a life. So we'll make a quick animation here. So I want to make sure I'm editing the right animation because I have 2 copies of this. We can see up here it's sprite player default. So that's not what I want to edit. I want to close this. I want to double click on sprite idle and then go back to edit image. So now I'm editing the correct image. So you have to be careful. Just make sure you're editing the right image. If you edit the wrong thing, you can always just like rename it and just make sure you don't, delete your old image. All right. So we want to make a quick animation here. So starting with the default image, I'm going to duplicate this frame, and I'm just going to make some changes to the frame. So I can make the character blink. That's like something that's really kind of cheap way to show that the character is alive. So I'll just turn on the onion skin again and just draw like a little line across the eyes. And so then if I play the animation, you can see the preview here. It's like going really fast and glitching out. We don't want it to look like that. So we want to change the frames per second. So we can do that down here. So we're going to set the frames per second to like maybe 4 frames per second. Okay, so that's a little more reasonable. We get this little blink. So then let's duplicate this frame again. So I can hit Command D. And I can drag this frame over here. So now we just have like a blink. And let's actually duplicate it one more time. And then I'll do another change on the last frame. Maybe I'll make him wave his arms. So I'll erase these arms. Again, I'm going through this kind of fast because I just want to demonstrate some stuff. You guys can spend more time on this, obviously. Okay, so now I have a nice little idle animation where he blinks and he waves his arms. So we'll always know that our player is working. So this is good enough for what we want to do. So now we'll move on to our walk animation. So I want to be careful to be editing the right sprite. So before I move on, I'm going to hit Command S to save and then just X out of this sprite. I'm going to go back to my default sprite and hit Command D to duplicate it again. And then I'm going to name this sprite player walk. You could also do run if you want, but we just want an animation for the player moving left and right. For this animation, I'm going to make my player walk to the right because that's going to be the easiest way to flip it back and forth. If you draw it going to the left, you can still make it flip back and forth. It's not that different, but it's a little bit easier if we do it to the right. So I'm going to make a new frame, and this one I'm going to turn on the onion skin and turn on the grid. And whoops, let me undo that. I didn't mean to draw there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'm gonna draw my player walking to the right. So I'm gonna roughly match the head, but I'll move it over a little bit to the right. And I'll move the eyes a little bit to the right. And I'll move the body kind of back like that. And let's fill that in. And then I'm just gonna make one arm kind of going up like that and one arm kind of going that way. And then I'll make one leg going out like that. That was a little bit too much. I'm sure you guys are much better artists than I am, so hopefully your characters will look a little bit better. So we've got our first, I'm gonna do like the worst 2-frame walk cycle you've ever seen. So I'm gonna just copy this frame that I just created. So I'm gonna right click and duplicate. And then I'm just gonna redo the arms and legs. In games, we are often going for speed and simplicity over detail and accuracy, because our game is really about the play, not necessarily the graphics. Although, of course, having nice graphics is a big advantage in your game. But anyway, I'm just going to switch these arms around. So this arm is going up, now it's going to go down. This arm is going down, now it's going to go up. It's going to look insane, so that's okay. And then I'm going to kind of like curl this leg around like that and then push this leg forward. Looks pretty bad. I'm kind of running out of room. There we go. Okay. And now I'm going to delete this first frame. I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to play this walk animation. And let's change the FPS to 6. And it looks like he's just kind of like dancing and being goofy. If I added a couple more frames, it would probably look better. But in the interest of time, I'm going to just keep going. Okay. So we've got our idle animation, we've got our walk animation. We need one more thing, which is the jump animation. So I'm gonna close my walk animation. I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna duplicate my default again. So we always wanna come back to this default animation so we know that our player sprites are gonna line up with each other. So we're gonna say sprite player jump. And I'm gonna open this guy up and go to edit image. And I'm gonna add a new frame here and turn on the onion skin. And I'm just gonna draw him jumping. You do not want to make your player jump inside the sprite. The game engine is going to make your player jump. If you make the player, if I draw the player up here, because he's like jumping, it's gonna look bad. The game engine does all the movement for us. All of the animations should be like walking in place, jumping in place, standing in place. Otherwise, it's gonna look glitchy and goofy. So I'm gonna turn on the grid. Even though he's jumping, I'm gonna draw his face in the exact same place. Still drawing with the mouse, so it looks goofy. Maybe I'll move the eyes up a little bit, so at the beginning of his jump, he's kind of like looking up here. And for jumping, I just wanna do like a really basic 2-frame jump. So he's gonna like be going down as he, his arms will be going down as he goes up, and then as he comes down, his arms will come up. So in the beginning of his jump, and he's going to the right in the jump as well. So I'm gonna make his body go to the right a little bit and fill it in. So as he's jumping up, he's going into the sky, so his arms are down. So it'll be like this, but I'm gonna make them a little bit wider for balance. And then both of his legs are gonna be kind of like hanging out like that. Okay, it doesn't have to be realistic, you guys can play around with different styles. So then we're gonna do one more frame. Obviously you can do more frames, but in this frame, he's coming down. So he's gonna start looking down a little bit. Like that. His body might be kind of a little more condensed. Who knows? But the main thing is his arms are going to be going up like that. And his legs are going to kind of like go out like that to get ready to land. And we're going to make this animation. So I'm going to delete my original animation or frame. And we're going to make this one really slow because the jump will happen, over a course of time. So that'll be pretty good. You can always edit these animations later if it doesn't match the physics perfectly. And you can add frames, you can make it more complex, but we just want to get some of these basics down. Okay, so that's it for this first part. Right now, all we're going to focus on is creating these 4 sprites, your default player, which is kind of the basic design that all the animations are based on, your idle animation where the player is just standing around, your walk animation where the player can walk back and forth, and then your jump animation where the player is jumping. If you want to add other animations, feel free to play around with different stuff. For our sort of like baseline game that we're going to build over the next few weeks, these are the 3 basic things that we're going to be able to do. All right, so I'm going to stop here and we'll do some in-class working time. As I mentioned, if you want to use a different art editor, you can. The problem with that is that you need to be able to make sprite sheets. I'm going to go over next week importing sprite sheets using assets that you can find online, but we're not going to go over that today. So for today, you may want to just work with the editor in GameMaker just to get a sense of how things work. But if you want to add images or art from a different program or from other assets, we'll go over how to do that in the future.